confident did you feel? That sounds like a pretty big risk.
Yeah, I was like, it varied by day.
Yeah.
Like some days I'm on an 11 out of 10, and some days I was like a 2. Like we would go weeks without a sign up, and I would start thinking, like, I better start looking for consulting work, and then we'd have like 5 signups on a day, and I'd be like, I'm gonna be rich by the summer. What kind of beach house should I get? So like it was up and down. But at the beginning, we had this really phased approach. So again, organizing the chaos. So in January, we held a big launch party. We rented out like the patio at the Saguaro Hotel in Scottsdale, and I invited all my entrepreneur friends that I knew, and we invited some press members there, and I borrowed this big touchscreen TV from one of my friends, and I was doing Trainual demos and like trying to make it this thing. And I gave everybody an on-site offer that you could buy a 6-month subscription for like $200. It was like a really low price, and we sold like 14 of those. And so it was a good showing. And so our January MRR was like a 30% improvement from our December MRR.
How was February?
February we launched on Product Hunt, and
Oh, yeah.
we made a decision to remove the credit card barrier because we wanted people to just be able to experience the app. It was less about selling it. It was more about getting feedback. So we got all this feedback from people on like, why wouldn't you use this? Or what didn't you like? Or what does it need to have in order for you to pay? And so February sales were horrible. That's when I was like, I may need more clients. March, we launched our Facebook ads for the first time. So this was a pivotal moment in the business. We hired a contractor because we didn't know anything about Facebook ads. We couldn't afford for them to do all the work, but we hired them as like a babysitter for us. We were like, can you teach us how to do this and tell us what we're doing wrong, and meet with us for a week to look at our numbers and stuff. And so we kind of taught ourselves how to do the Facebook ads. And the awesome advice that I got. So first of all, they said, you can't do Facebook ads, or you shouldn't do Facebook ads if you're not willing to spend at least $100 a day on one ad. And that's $3,000 for the month. That is like a big investment. That could have been another employee, right?
Right.
And so they said, if you're not willing to spend $100 a day on one ad, you're just not putting enough out there to even know if you're going to get a return. And the more I thought about this, I realized they're totally right. Like, if you flip a coin 5 times, it might be heads 5 times, right? You have to give yourself enough of that room before the numbers start to average out. And so that's what we were committing to, was if we think we've got a $300 CAC or something, we need to give ourselves 10x of that to see if we can get our first sale. And then maybe over time it averages out.
Is part of that because you're wrenching on the copy or the ad, or you're iterating on what's working? I mean, as part of that, you just need a bigger data set to know if, like, is this thing working, and then iterate?
Yeah, it was like, if you have anything less than that, you won't, no one will see it, and you won't get that data set. And of course, I'm skeptical of like advertising. It's like, no, I did a $25 promoted post last year and got nothing out of it, And like, I think a lot of people had like dabbled, and so spending $3,000 on Facebook was a big risk. But we understood our numbers. We knew at that time we're charging $99 a month, and we had customers, a few dozen customers that had been using the tool. Even though they were my consulting clients, I'm kind of like bridging that gap and thinking, I think they'll stay on for at least 6 months. If we can get a customer, maybe we've got a 6-month LTV. And so worst case, like, we need to be able to pay back that CAC, and it's a 1-to-1. Like, we got a customer, we learned from them. That was the plan going into the Facebook ads. And so after our first month, we brought in 5 customers that were strangers to me. And it's like, well, it must be from the Facebook ads. Like, that's the only thing that we're doing.
What was that like, bringing in your first, like, you don't know me customers? Like, you didn't
Thrilling.
have to buy this.
Thrilling. Because and that's when I knew, like, even though you've got 5 people paying $99 a month, the fact that someone's willing to put a credit card into a website that looked as terrible as ours did, it validated that there is a real problem here, and there's something that people would buy.
I'll pay for the thing you built.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I kept telling myself, if we could sell 10 of these, why can't we sell 100? It's just like if we had more eyeballs on this, we would get exponentially more signups. And so month 2, April comes around of digital ads, and the coolest thing happened. We committed again to 3,000, or we may increase it to 4,000, I think. And not only did we get the expected number of customers, we got more. And the realization was, there's people that saw the ad in March that didn't convert until April. So now we've got this like snowballing effect where customers are even cheaper than we thought they were going to be. And so in May, we like double our budget to $8,000. And in June, we increase it again to like $15,000. And so that was the game we were playing, was just, if this is working, let's like keep up in the ante. Yeah. And so we went from our first $3,000 in March to by September spending $40,000 a month on Facebook and Instagram ads.
And this is still 2018, right?
Yeah. And so by this point, now I'm like, okay, this is gonna work. We had built it. We crossed 10,000 in MRR that June, and then we got to 19,000 in July, and 27,000 in August, and 38,000 in September, and
I remember meeting you right in that window. We had a couple of interactions over a few month period of time, and I'd ask you kind of what your MRR was, and I was like, this guy's MRR is like going up every time I talk to him, like in a really material way. So I remember that period of time because that was right around when we met. It was like late 2018, early 2019, and that growth was just amazing.
Yeah, it was. It was exciting and
intentional. I would say amazing, and I loved how intentional you were about, hey, we're going to keep scaling this thing.
Yeah, and I was very intentional because I saw what the dollars did every month. I put more in, I get more out. And so I was like putting everything in, pouring everything I could, and it got pretty dicey. So like that. What do you mean? So my wife and I, we had talked about, what we'd be willing to contribute to this. I'm like way past that. It was like, let's get a home equity line of credit and start taking out like all of the equity we've put into our house. Let's we maxed out all of our personal credit cards. Which it got to the point where like she called me one time from the grocery store, and all the cards were failing, and she like had to go put groceries back because the cards were not going through. And she's like, well, what am I supposed to use? What card am I supposed to use? I was selling stuff, like just going through my closets and selling stuff. We had this Vespa that it was like my prized possession. I bought it when we moved to Arizona because you can't really have a Vespa in Boston. It doesn't pencil out. So I had this Vespa. We rode away from our wedding in this Vespa, like the just married thing, and I slung it for $2,000. Like
so you could eat
during these.
But it has all that. You're like parting with things that have sentimental value to you.
Yeah. And so it was tough. And then, the credit card companies would send you those checks. They're like 0 interest for whatever. I'm like, yeah, I'm just writing myself like pay to Chris,
Been there.
and opening up new credit cards. And so I was like, all chips are going in on the table. And what made me confident is that I knew the consulting revenue that I was generating just a year earlier. And I felt like if all of this fails, I know I can go back to everybody that I know and say, hey, I'm for hire again, and I could climb out of this hole. So that was what gave me the confidence. But I was all chips in. And so I remember October 12th or 13th it was, Facebook sends an email back that like your credit card's bouncing. Your credit card's not going through. And I'm like, what do you mean? American Expresses don't have a limit. They do. They have a limit.
And you found it.
Yeah. And so yeah, that's when we kind of hit a brick wall.
One of the things I like in this podcast is hitting on attributes or patterns that I see in entrepreneurs and people building interesting companies. And what you just said about, hey, what's the worst thing that happens here? I just go back to my consulting business. I don't know what that attribute is, but there's something that shows up in entrepreneurs over and over, like people that are building companies where it's like, I'm actually not that worried about looking like an idiot if my business fails. I can always go do this other thing again if I have to. I mean, does that resonate what I'm saying? Like people that don't start companies are usually more concerned about failing at this thing because for whatever reason. But I don't know, people that have built successful companies, they're less worried about failing because they always know there'll be something else.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I feel like this has showed up in my life a bunch of times because like when all my friends in college were getting job offers, and I was like, nah, I'm not gonna apply. I'm just gonna do my video company. Everybody's like, what?
Why are you doing that?
You're crazy. Like, why would you do that? And it's like, well, I can get a job next year if I want to, but like, I'm going to try this right now. And, you know, I think there's something to just the backup planning of like, what are my other options? You know, like you can always live with a friend. You can always downgrade your apartment. You can always sell your car. You can always, and so I always had that like enough backup options that I didn't make me afraid. I wasn't like down to my last, you know, going to be homeless.
Yeah, that's an abundance mindset, right? That's a growth mindset, abundance. I remember saying to my wife in the early days of Campus Logic, I'm like, what are we willing? You talked to your wife about this too. What are we willing to invest? What are we willing to lose? And I remember having the conversation, well, what's the worst thing that happens? We go live with my mom. And that sounds intolerable to some people, but we thought it was fine.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not that there's worse things that have happened.
I know.
And so I love that founder's mindset of, hey, I'm gonna go after this, and if I've got to go back to something else, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world.
You know, Chris, I love that you shared that story because it's really vulnerable, and I think most founders actually go through some version of that at some point and don't know that it's normal. Mm-hmm. I know I went through my version of that, and I thought it was totally abnormal until, do you know Pat Stoner? Do you remember Pat Stoner? I had coffee with him, and he's like, let me tell you about the early days of flypaper. Exact same stuff. You know, I used personal savings to pay for payroll a couple of times and then paid myself back. I'm like, this is so wrong and abnormal, but it's not.
No.
That stuff, you know, maxing out the credit cards. And I love that your wife called you from the grocery store and said, I can't buy food. I mean, it's sad. And
it's funny in hindsight.
Like, so
she
honest.
didn't think it was that funny probably at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was like, well, why are you at Whole Foods? Go to go to Walmart.
Right.
Food City.
And how supportive your wife sounds.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like she's in this with you.
Totally. And so we've known each other since we were 15, been dating since we were 17, never broke up. So she's been there through every company, and so she had a lot of faith in what we were building, you know. And she was the one prodding me about almost like taunting me about my MRR, right?
I really want to get to talk about marketing, but since we're talking about your wife, I don't know your wife, but you as much as anyone I know, can we talk about your annual planning exercise with your wife? Because I love that approach, and I don't want to. This seems like a good segue to that.
Yeah,
I want to
sure.
get to Trainual, but that's such an important part of, I think, the way you live your personal life and your work life together. So I'd love to hear more about how you think about that, if that's okay.
Yeah. So this is something we started doing like a decade ago, and at the time, I had my my video company, I think still, or I was just getting out of my video company and getting into consulting. And so I was really thinking about goals, about what do I need to do this week, this month, this year. And I have two friends that I started meeting for a weekly breakfast, and we would sit down for our weekly breakfast and plan out exactly what we were going to do for the week, and then we would hold each other accountable the next week and have like a check-in, and whoever did the worst with their goals had to pay for breakfast. And so there's like this built-in incentive.
You built your accountability cohort.
Yeah.
I love it.
Love that.
Yeah. And so I realized, like, as I was doing that, I should do some sort of like weekly check-in with my wife as well. And so we started doing this like Sunday night, like sit down, have a glass of wine, plan out our week. Now we call it decaf discussions because we're not drinking all the time. So we still do this where we sit down, we plan out our week, and we just go through the schedule. We go through now what the kids are doing, what, you know, if there's any nights that I have commitments or things like that. And we had this like really good open line of communication. And then I started thinking with my business, we do annual planning, we do quarterly planning. Like, what does that look like for the house? And so my wife and I one time just decided to do a staycation in like early January one year. We went to a resort locally, and we went through a reflection on the last year and what went right, what went wrong, what we would change if we had the opportunity, areas of our life that we thought we were doing a good job in. And there's this little like exercise we use that goes through like fitness and financials and your mental state. And so it's this really great workshop we do. And after that, we felt so aligned. Like, we know exactly what this year is all about. We each had like our top 10 focus areas, our big 3 goals for the year. And then we committed to meeting quarterly and reviewing those things with each other as like a quarterly planning. And so we make it like a date night or something. And I'm more the one that's driving it. I'm like, oh, honey, it's time to pull out our goals list. She's like, okay, I roll. And so we've been doing this now for 10 years, and we really make an event of it. And so we started, if either we go out of town for an overnight or we go to a local resort, and it's a full day thing where we go through the last year, we go through the upcoming year, we set our goals. And it's, again, back to your word, intention. It's a really intentional way to plan out our year and to be able to support each other.
And to create alignment with the most important person in your life, right? That's really incredible.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So it's worked out well. And then we've got whiteboards around the house, like bathroom and home office, where we write all our top 10s. So
Have you brought your kids into this process yet?
a little bit. So one of the things we did was create family values, sort of like you have core values at your company. And so we've got our 10 values printed out and on the wall. And at dinners, we'll point to them and ask the kids to come up with an example of how they represented one of the particular values, and they'll come up with something adorable. We tried to do last year a planning session with the kids at my office, and we brought them in to come up with their goals for the year. And even my older one was like, I would like to be in the NBA by next year. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we're not quite there, but so we're like infusing it little by little. I think as they get older, we absolutely will.
Chris, we'd love to hear a little bit more. Thanks for sharing some of those personal things. Incredible, I think, life hacks, too. You should be a marriage counselor after this. That'd be good.
Act 5.
Act 5. I'd love to hear about a couple things, diabetes and running. Which one do you want to start with?
Let's start with diabetes, since that was part of my life first.
Okay, let's hear about it.
Yeah, so let's see. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was almost 9 years old. So 8 years old, I was at a basketball camp, and I'm just running around like a normal kid. And a couple of the symptoms are like you can't drink enough water, insatiable thirst, and then you have to use the bathroom all the time. And so because I'm at this camp, I'm like, of course, just filling up water bottles and drinking. We're outside. It's the summertime. And so no one's thinking too much of it. But there were a few games where I had to leave the outdoor court like 4 times during the game to run back inside. And so the coach thought it was kind of weird. He told my mom, and my mom every week would take me to allergy shots at the time. And she asked the doctor when we went in, she said, do you mind checking him? Just like, is there a way for you to check his blood sugar? I've heard about diabetes. And the doctor's like, no, he's fine. He's just a healthy kid, like nothing to worry about. We'll check him if you want. And so they tested me, and the doctor came out to us in the waiting room and was like, Mrs. Ronzio, I need to talk to you.
Gosh, every parent's worst fear.
Yeah. And so my mom is just, like shell shocked, doesn't know what to think. She brings me home. We have to go straight to the hospital. And so we're like packing up stuff. I'm going to stay over at the hospital. I think it's a lot easier now, but 30 years ago, it was kind of don't know what you're in for. I'm like trying to grab a Coca-Cola out of the pantry. She's like, no, you can never have soda again. And I'm like, Mom. And so we go to the hospital, and it's just, you realize like this is a new life for the rest of life. You have to learn how to take shots and prick your fingers, and so drawing blood, and how to measure what you're eating, and again, so much has changed 30 years ago, but it was this massive new part of my life that was disruptive to my childhood, but also helpful in all the best ways. Like, I think so many of the attributes I have as an entrepreneur, I fine-tuned because of the experience I had with diabetes.
Like what?
Like as a 9 and 10-year-old, having to calculate your dosages and carb count and keep a log book of everything, it made me really good at math. It made me super high accountability, very trustworthy, and like, I'm not gonna like lie about my health stuff to my parents. You know, you got to do that, and then also really good at strategic planning. So I leave, you know, a lot of people would just like run out the door and not think twice about it. I'm like, do I have my meter? Do I have my insulin? Do I have a snack in case I get low? Do I have something to take later on in case they don't have food I can eat at the party that my friend's birthday party, you know? So like, it was just so much planning, and it made me really analytical. So I think it was actually a blessing in that way. And then the other thing it did is, being in school, I had, you know, kind of like a lifetime hall pass. You know, like you had to like go to the nurse and check yourself, and so I had this like special relationship with all the administrators at the school, and I walked through the place like I owned it, and I think it built a lot of confidence and made me a good leader.
You're going to need a little extra time to go print your 11th business card. So that was good. You could get a hall pass to get out to go print your business card for your next company.
Exactly. Actually, diabetes came in handy with entrepreneurship too, because I made a lemonade stand and I set up like 6 flavors of Crystal Light. And I put a little sign that said, "It's sugar-free, I'm diabetic. You can leave tips if you want."
And did they all eat
oh
chips?
yeah,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
I'd be getting like $20 cups of lemonade. So
Play that trump card.
Give the diabetic kid a little extra,
Yeah.
right,
little
right.
extra tip.
It
I love
sounds like you learned how to organize your own chaos.
Yes,
That
some
was
would
the
say.
start.
Some would say, yeah. Yeah, so it was a big part of my life early on, and then, you know, the other cool thing it did was, I always heard from 30 years ago that there'll be a cure in your lifetime. You know, like, this is something that they've made tremendous progress in the last 50 years, and in the next 50 there's going to be, you know, we think, a cure. And so every time I would go into the doctor's appointments quarterly, I'd have to go in and get blood work and talk to the endocrinologist. I would be asking about the tech advancements and like, what's coming, what's new. And so I got myself into a few studies and a few like beta kind of programs. So when I lived in Boston, there was a new company that was making an insulin pump, and they had visions of being the first kind of closed loop system that could read your sugar and deliver it to you. And they picked me as the first teenager in the world to go on this insulin pump thing. And so I had the president of the company fly out and take me and my parents to dinner, and they were giving me all this like cool like tech stuff. And so it really just fed into innovation and my love for that kind of advancement.
How special did you feel?
Super special. It was better than the hall pass. And then, so fast forward to now, I was fortunate to be asked to be on the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation's board.
Going to ask you about that. Yep.
And so I'm on the regional board for Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and so I get to see, you know, front and center all the advancements that they're making toward a cure. And so it really feels like now it's maybe the next 10 years that functionally this disease can be cured for millions of people. So pretty
That's
exciting.
amazing. What's something for those of us that aren't close to juvenile diabetes? Like, what's one thing that the everyman should know about this disease?
Well, I think people have this misperception that, you know, you hear diabetes and you think it's a nutrition problem, it's an exercise problem, because there's this difference between type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetes. Mm-hmm. So type 2 is something that you can get when you're older, you can get if you're not in the best shape, because it has to do with your body's resistance to insulin. And so you're not absorbing the insulin that your body's creating. Whereas type 1 means your body just doesn't create any. It's a totally different thing that has the same kind of end result, but it's a totally different reason that's happening. And so it used to be called juvenile diabetes, and now they shifted more to type 1 because people really can get this at any point in their life. It's just more common to get it when you're younger because you've got this predisposition in your DNA. And for most people, those little switches get turned earlier in their lives that would present the symptoms. So I guess the misconception is that, you know, it's not a exercise thing, it's not a diet thing, it's truly a you know, something your organ doesn't produce a hormone.
Well, this is probably a good segue because I know you're an athlete. You love to compete. You love to run, not just like run down the block 100 meters here, long runs. How does this fit in? So first of all, tell us about that, and then how do these things come together? How does the diabetes and the extreme athletics here come together?
Well, it's unique. It's ironic that they come together now because for so long, diabetes is what kept me from doing a lot of these things. I had this built into my head that because I have this, I can't really push myself. Like those are things that I just couldn't do. And I remember being at an event once, and it was like this kind of entrepreneur / fitness, really like ambitious group of people. They held this morning like workout thing, and I opted out of the workout. And as I'm talking to people later on in the sessions, they were like, well, why didn't you come this morning for the run, whatever? And I was like, oh, I have diabetes, you know, like, and it bothers me when I do that sort of stuff. And they're like, does it really, or is that just a story you're telling yourself? You know? And so that got in my head. And then when we were starting Trainual, my brother, who is also like a crazy adventure athlete, he started challenging me to do things with him. He had been on, did you ever see the NBC show that was the Spartan Race show?
Oh, yeah.
So he was on that show, and his team didn't make it very far, so not a ton of airtime, but he had always done those kind of like OCR competition type things. And so when he was coming to Arizona to help start Trainual, he asked if I would do a race with him. So we signed up for a Spartan race, and it was a big challenge. Like I couldn't run a mile without feeling like awful. You know, I remember trying to run around my block, and before I got home, I had to lay down on the concrete, and I was like trying to rub my back on the curb because I felt like I couldn't breathe or something hurt in the back of my lung. Like,
And when was this?
2018, the beginning.
5 years ago.
Yeah.
That's
And
not
so
that long ago.
yeah, and so it was a big hurdle to get over to start to do these races. And so to train, I started running the trails around my house, and you know, I would walk up the mountain, and then I would jog up the beginning part, and then I was making like progress little by little. And what I started to see is that the progress I was making physically was super aligned with the progress that the business was making. It was like I was on this parallel trajectory where if I could push myself and have this endurance physically, it was building this mental strength that worked for me in the business world. And so as I would set business goals, I'm also setting fitness goals and personal goals, and I pushed myself quite a bit in the last 5 years.
So when you're on these long runs, these long training runs, and you're zoning out, what kind of epiphanies do you have that you take into
All of them.
work? All of them.
All of them. It's
it
like
all gets solved on the mountain.
it does, and in the mountain, and I started doing triathlons and in the pool as well. Like there's nothing to distract you. You're staring at the bottom of a pool, and so I jump into the pool with a problem, and I come out with a decision. You know, it's like magic where if I fixate on something and I know I've got something to solve, by the end of a run, by the end of a swim or a bike ride, I can really process through a lot of it and be like, what is the thing that's nagging at me? Like, what is, if there was a voice inside that's saying, do this thing, what is that? And I get super clear on it through these races. So yeah, it started off with just the Spartan race, and then it was a half marathon that I did, and then I did my first triathlon, and then I did a half Ironman, and then a marathon, and then the most recent cool one was a full marathon in Antarctica this past March. Yeah, so that was pretty cool.
How do you even train for that in Arizona?
Flagstaff's pretty cold, actually.
Pretty cold.
Yeah, and so I was driving up to Flagstaff on the weekends through the winter and running in 20-degree weather, and
My
then
goodness.
and then even Scottsdale in the mornings in the winter in January, February, it can be in the 30s.
What was the What was the temp at race time in Antarctica?
29. So it was the middle of the summer there, you know, and you're running on like the top northern peninsula kind of area. But halfway through the race, it turned into like blizzard conditions, and so it's like snow coming down sideways, and they're talking about shutting down the race if you don't finish soon enough, and I'm pushing through cramps, and so it was quite the experience.
What was the coolest experience of that race?
Of the race?
The coolest moment that you remember from that race?
My brother came with me, and so running the beginning with him was pretty cool. Just to be like, you know, we're on Antarctica running, and you know, this was also during the SVB collapse, and so and we're like, and the business is fine. You know, it of everything that we're about with Trainual is like to help people run an organized company where you've got people that you count on to do the things they're supposed to do. And I think this was the epitome of that, to be in Antarctica for 3 weeks with my brother, the other co-founder of the company, totally detached from anything, no cell phone signal or anything. And the company is in great shape.
And know that you're fine.
Yeah, it was like a really gratifying moment.
Are you that dog with the coffee in the meme with the fire all around that says this is fine? That's you.
I haven't seen
I've
the
never.
You haven't seen that
it.
meme?
I've seen it.
This is one of the most popular memes at Campus Logic.
I don't see many. Go ahead. It's about you, not me.
I've never identified with that, but I guess maybe.
You're just you're like, this is okay.
Yeah,
I've got this. We've
I
all
do-
got this.
I do feel like that. Yeah, because it's part of being able to handle a lot of chaos, and I think that came with the video days. You know, like we've even got camera stuff around us right now. But if you imagine being in an arena with a crew of 30 people, and you've got live stuff, you've got instant replay stuff, you've got 8 cameras, you've got hundreds of people that are trying to get your videos at the table, you've got cables that are going out, batteries that are dying, people that are calling you on the walkie-talkie with problems, like that for so long kind of made me numb to problems.
The ability to manage concurrent processes and lots going on is definitely a skill. Well, we're gonna pick up in episode 2. We're gonna pick up a lot more about Trainual and talk about that. But thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Excited.
The Phoenix Founders Podcast is sponsored by Arizona Venture Development Corp.,